All right, hey, what's going on? I'm Coach T. This is week 39 of my C Sharp DevLog, where I'm studying for 1 year to learn C Sharp, and about a third of the journey now has been also learning Unity. Um, this video diary is going to be divided into two parts. The first part is going to be just the weekly update. The second part is going to be showing off how the thing I show you in the weekly update works. So there's a little bit of a slideshow. I'll try to keep the video diary part trim, and I'll also try to keep the technical walkthrough trim as well. But I do want to show it off because I'm kind of proud of it, and I feel like it's kind of a landmark moment for me in both designing with C Sharp and in designing with Unity, where I had an idea, I built an idea, I refined an idea, and I made it way better. So this week was a little bit of a roller coaster at work, and I did a lot of coding at home to just kind of like de-stress. So it was nice to have a project I could work on that was comprehensible, that allowed me to work quietly and get a productive output at the end that I'm proud of. So yeah, so what I have been going back and forth on for the last couple weeks, and I've involved my friends in making some of these decisions at this point, is what type of project do I really want to work on over the summer? Do I want to make an FPS? Do I want to make a top-down shooter? Do I want to make an adventure game? I have lots of ideas swirling around in my head because I contribute to and write for two RPG games that have a lot of the elements that are cross-compatible with a video game. So it'd be fun to build something in those universes. But how that genre emerges and the game design decisions, the software architectural decisions are going to have to stem from what type of thing I want to work on, obviously. So as I'm prepping and beginning to warm up into the spring, knowing the summer is going to be a time for making, I'm trying to make some of those decisions now so that once I'm on break, as much as I get a break with my position, because I work in schools, but I don't have a typical position. My schedule's a little bit different. But when I have that time, and I've got time to work rather than taking time away from family stuff over the summer, because we've got a busy summer looking, I want to be able to make stuff quickly and not be worrying about some of these like pre-design decisions. So I think we've settled, we being me and a couple other guys that are going to do a little bit of contribution to the process. We've more or less settled on a top-down shooter. So, or a twin stick adventure is probably a better way to think about it, because it's not necessarily going to require shooting. I'd like to make it so that there are different ways of being successful. The scope of that, however, is being kept really, really limited right now. So I'm kind of approaching this as like before I did micro projects where I would work on one particular thing. I'm working on combining everything into one single code base with assets that I can put into and out of different projects when I need them. And also, I'm working on making it as much code governed as I can. So I'm really, really, really working on the C Sharp itself. That means this week I was learning about Unity actions and C Sharp events and delegates. So it's been a while since I really dug into a new topic in C Sharp. It's been a couple weeks since I was reviewing generics and stuff, but this is the first time that I've really looked at delegates and Unity events, which is neat. I'm doing that with the GameDev.tv Unity design pattern course, which is, it talks about Unity and how to implement things in Unity, but really it's about C Sharp and the design patterns in C Sharp or object-oriented programming more generally. So it's really good. It's 3 hours long, but I'm kind of milking it because I'm enjoying it a lot. I've watched a lot of the videos twice just to make sure that I'm getting as much out of it as I can before I move on to the next thing. And a lot of it has been immediately applicable. So, for example, in the twin stick controller, which I'll show here in just a second, I needed a way to quickly communicate that an event needs to get triggered or something needs to get triggered. But the course is also really pushing me to utilize the observer pattern to decouple dependencies and to, wherever possible, invert dependencies. So I've been thinking about that really carefully as I go. I'm doing a lot of pseudocode and trying to map out relationships between things. And then he shows off Unity actions, which I can assign in the editor, but it keeps the it keeps the classes and objects decoupled. And from what I can tell, the prefabs, as long as it's on the same game object, maintain. So that makes it very modular, and I like that. So all that said, my project this week has really been to nail the twin stick controller feel, and I'm very close to finishing. I started with the script that I wrote back in January-ish. Excuse me. Early January. I think I spent like 7 or 8 days really working on pulling together resources from some tutorials, a little bit of Chat GPT, Unity script documents, the Unity in Action book, to build a twin stick controller that worked. And I had to solve a bunch of problems while I was doing that. Of those 4 or 5 resources that I was using, most of it came out of 2 tutorial videos on how the input system works and how rotation math works. ChatGPT confused me, and I discovered, introduced a lot of things that I didn't need, because this week, instead of going back to scratch, I went back to that script with 2 more months of practice writing C# and using Unity and learning how to think procedurally about how code executes, how math and rotation work, or not math, how transforms and rotations work. And I started going line by line by line through that. And what I discovered is the one artifact left over from when I was very confused about rotational logic and I was trying to query the different LLMs to get help with it. It introduced a translation to local coordinates that is totally useless. It's the only thing in there. So once again, the LLM has proven not only not helpful, but abstruse. So it's just a reminder that in the learning process, offloading investigation and creativity onto AI is really just a way to poison your own well. Learn my lesson. That said, the work that I have in the controller now is entirely mine. I have added a couple of different layers that I'll show off in the technical thing. I'm running up on how long I want this to be. But it's extensible, it's modifiable, it's tunable, it's very encapsulated, and it's been very easy to debug and extend. So on Wednesday and Thursday, I started by working on the encapsulation and really trying to utilize the observer pattern and I thought it was going to take me all weekend. I had it working on Wednesday and I had it completed on Thursday so that it was completely functional the way I wanted it to be. And then by the end of Thursday, I had added jumping. And that was fun. That was way easier than I thought it was going to be. So Friday, yesterday, I'm recording this on Saturday afternoon at this point. A very wet, cold, rainy Saturday afternoon. I worked outside all morning. On Friday, I tried to figure out how to utilize instancing and rigid bodies to make it possible to throw objects. And that was not in the original code base. And all it took me to do to add it was to create the action map. I added that into my action map. And then in my input manager, which I'll show off in a couple minutes, I just added the onThrow method, and then I call out to my equipment handler, or whatever that class is called, and that's where the logic is handled. And it took, I don't know, half an hour, maybe. I had a harder time trying to jimmy with the mechanics of how does the physics and the rigid body work than I did actually adding a totally new feature into the code base. Now, granted, my code base is a mustard seed compared to what it probably, probably will be at the end, but it was a nice lesson and an object lesson in how clean code practices and clear separation of responsibilities makes it easy for me to improve what it is that I'm building. It's robust and unintentionally hilarious. So all that said, I'm going to flip to my capturing gameplay. I'll show you what I mean. It's not. This is less graphical than the one that I had showed off. Oh, my mouse is asleep. Less graphical than the one that I had showed off before, where I had animations going on the character. But I really decided to take a step back from that. I know how to implement animations and manage the animation blend tree and state machine at this point. What I don't necessarily know how to do is really tune this controller to work just the way I wanted it to, or I didn't. I do now, and I'm just not going to let the art distract me from building the code base. Once I have a game that I enjoy playing, then I can start to add in the art assets. In the meantime, it's just not necessary, and it just distracts from the core code-based mechanical problems and puzzles that I need to solve. So, what do we got going on? Well, right now, the character is focusing, which means that I have the right mouse button held down, and you can see he tracks where the mouse is. He's just slightly behind because there's a lerp going on there, which is by design. If you move up close, he'll rotate faster. You go farther away. Very sensitive. It doesn't seem to have any issues with figuring out exactly where the mouse is on screen, so when I have hooking or shooting hooked up, which I don't right now for a couple reasons, it's very easy to be accurate and be intuitive. The other thing that I can do is I can focus by pressing the directional keys, which is also mapped to the right thumbstick on a gamepad. And I can move. So right now I'm doing single-handed driving, and I'm using WASD, which would be the equivalent of the left thumbstick, to basically control the direction that the character's looking, or I can focus to strafe, and I can use the mouse pad to strafe. So that allows you to, let's say I'm coming around this corner, and there's enemies. I can just shoot and fire at the enemies. You can see down in the bottom, it's reporting that I'm shooting, but I had detached it. I can also jump, and that's new to any project that I've made. I've never had a real jumping mechanic before. And there it is. I like the way that it feels, but I want to tune with it a little bit more because it might be a little bit too floaty. So I need to play with the gravity mechanics. It looks pretty good if you fall as well. So if I just fall, it's lerping the gravity force there. I got to play with it and see if it really is exactly how I want it to feel. But you can see I can navigate the environment. If I move into certain areas, things will spawn in. And I can jump, right? I can also sprint. So you can see he really juts to full speed. My project for after I get out of this video is I'm going to work on getting the sprint speed to lerp as well. That is one of the final things that I think I really need to do to get this character controller to feel good right now. The other thing is when he's sprinting, you can see he doesn't turn quite as fast. So if I just one-handed drive pretty quick, if I'm sprinting, it just takes, it takes about twice as long because right now I'm sprinting twice as fast. And what that does is it's just dividing the turn rotation float by the modifier on sprint. So the faster you sprint, the slower you turn, which works out pretty well, I think. I don't know if that's how it's going to be in a final product, but at least for prototyping, it does make it so that when you're sprinting, you do feel a little bit less controllable. Whereas, you just saw me miss that ring. I can just walk right around and I don't have any issues. So the last feature of this is the grenade toss. So right now it spawns a simple sphere with a rigid body. It's got like a 3 or 4 second fuse. It bounces and boom, it explodes. Not totally happy with the physics on it, but it does the job right now. And you can see too, it shakes the screen. At the moment, there's no limit on how many of those things I can shoot off. And in fact, the glitch that I introduced was when I had first started working with the rigid bodies, I was struggling to get it to just project out of the vector 3, or out of the vector 3.forward, the forward transform, out of the front of the character. So it would spawn it down below, and then he would just go upwards on a tower. So that's it for this particular controller. You can no longer grenade fly around, funny as it was. And this is a 10-minute idea that I had a couple nights ago, but these are basically just gravity pads. So they don't work quite the way I want them to yet. I got to work on that. But they do work eventually, and they just give you a little like bunny hop. So I'm going to keep working on that. I don't know if I'll ever actually use them for anything, but I was just trying to experiment with how to basically apply the logic from jumping to a trigger collider to make things happen. Another thing I got to fix right now is every time something spawns in, more of this thing spawns. So it becomes this like be not afraid Death Star. So that's it for the controller. At this point, I'm going to switch over and I'm going to show off how this works on more of a technical side. So if you're in for the weekly diaries, cool. I'll be back next week. I don't know. I doubt I'm going to have as much time as I had this week on weeknights. I had hard time sleeping, so I got a lot more coding done than I otherwise would have. but I'm going to work on getting the inventory managed and getting basic gunplay elements set up. That's, I think, going to be the next step, because before I move on to any scenario gameplay or enemy work or environment design or even greater game state, I think I need to get the game feel for the player down in a way that I want to play it. So in a way that's enjoyable, and it's getting very close. I really enjoy moving around my little playground there. I've had a lot of fun. A couple times I've just spent time goofing around in it, which is, I think, a good sign. Not going to do any animations right now. I'm not interested in it. It's just not a good use of my time, because we haven't pinned down the basics, the core of the game. But we're close with the character controller, and then we can start to look at more of the game management, or the enemies. So what I'm working on is I have mapped all the controls. I'll flip back really quickly, just show how many of the controls I've mapped, since this is ostensibly really for me in the future. If I look at all my control schemes, I have all of these different things mapped. Some of them do things, some of them do not do things. But I tried really hard to be proactive in thinking about how can I get interactions, inputs from players with minimal finger movement, since it's kind of a one-handed game where the mouse only has two inputs. It's got left and right click, or left click and right hold. And with that said, I mean, the left hand on a keyboard needs to be able to also drive the character while being able to tap critical keys. So I'm still mapping that out and trying to get it to a point where I'm happy with it. But I have all of these functioning or doing something. So that's a good point to transfer over to talking about the technical side of what it is that we're working on here. So with that said, if you're only here for the video diary, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're into that kind of thing, and I will see you next week. If you want to stick around for the little brief technical demonstration, here we go. Okay, so now we are looking at a slideshow that I put together just to what is that? Just to demonstrate how this is working. Let me make sure. Nope, that doesn't work the way that I thought it would. Okay, whatever. So we've got a couple of things here. We have the player input component, we have the character controller component, and then we have these 4 scripts on the player object. And you can see them here in the editor. If I go back to scene and I select player, the only one that's missing is the environment interaction script, and that's just because it's only theoretical at this point. So the player input component sends messages with the control map that I just showed over to the character controller component, or not to the character controller, sorry, to the player input manager. The player input manager could then be said to observe the player input component, since it doesn't actually hold a reference to it. And then it passes input information along to other scripts as bools, vector2s, or unity actions. So in that way, this one script is the only thing that looks directly at the player input component, and then it acts as a router for information read from the player input component. It does have a couple of dependencies. It has dependencies on a movement script, otherwise you can't call those, it can't pass that information along. And for now, it has a dependency on the active equipment. I have to investigate if I can decouple that further, but one of the things that I have been doing is sending along a bool to tell the active equipment about whether or not it should be attacking. I have an idea for how I can decouple that further. I just haven't put it into play yet because I've had a lot going on. But my goal is to really only have a dependency maybe on movement and maybe on a camera at some point. I want there to be as little dependency as possible. So then I have the TDS move input, which observes this input manager, or I guess it really doesn't observe the input manager, but it reacts to it. And it has 3 states for move, aim, and jump that contain very basic input game logic. And then it sets the character controller's move, it sets the transform's rotation, and it does all of that with just a couple of basic speed settings and modifiers. So very reliable, very simple, very easy for me to have debugged the logic. The input manager also talks to the active equipment script, which right now it does observe the TDS input manager. It has a dependency to it, but there are a number of functions in it that are really just observer functions. And when this one fires off Unity actions, this one does certain things. So, for example, reloading, throwing, those are just Unity actions. It also has a couple of states. So, are you shooting? Are you reloading? Are you throwing? I kept these as limited as possible because I don't want to have to debug a really complicated logical switch. I just want it to be simple and reliable and fast. And then eventually, maybe tomorrow, I'm going to write this environment interaction script, and that will enable a character with that component on it to interact with the environment either by equipping something automatically or pressing a key to equip something like that. I just haven't done it yet. I'm going to use raycasting, so I have an idea of how this will be implemented. It just hasn't happened yet. And for a slightly more technical example, the player input component passes data along by way of, I think, sending messages, so Unity actions, to the TDS input script, which has a couple of methods like on move, on attack, on throw that are all matching the names of the items laid out in my action map. And when it senses that event, it reads the controller and it passes, for example, with moving, it passes a vector 2 through to the TDS move script's public set move function, which is over here. And what that does is it updates the move input state of the movement. So rather than having a state like is moving true false, it just reads whether or not is moving is 0 0 or not. And that allows the handle move to operate fluidly. So in the update loop, it's always trying to handle movement, but it returns if it's not getting any valid input. Or rather, if input is below the dead zones as defined in the action map. So that way, I'm not wasting computation on infinitesimally small micro movements. So on attack works a little bit differently. It's a bool, and what it does is it communicates to the active equipment script, and it looks for, is this true? So set attack to true or set attack to false. And that also works in the update loop. So if attack is true, then it executes an attack if another state, like a timer or whatever, matches. Otherwise, is attacking as false in the update loop, it immediately returns and it saves the computational power there. And then I have on throw, which is just a Unity event. That's why it's an invoke. And all that does is as soon as the active equipment hears, hey, I should be throwing something, then it throws based on a prefab. So very easy for me to have implemented that. It was not in my, I've never done that kind of thing before, and it worked right away. So I'm having a harder time with the physics, but whatever. And then, of course, the TDS movement script does move the character controller component around. So that's how this system works. Hopefully it sounds clean. It's pretty clean in the scripting. Cool. I have all of these events, which are serialized, and I just handled the subscription to those events in the editor. I might change them to actions, though. I have to investigate a little bit more into Sam's course to see what would be the better way to do it. This does feel a little bit ridiculous to have all these serialized fields. I mean, whoa, if I'm a game designer rather than a programmer, then I have to come in and manage all this. But if I could just do this as a programmer and save all of this, then maybe that's better. Maybe it also makes no difference. I don't know. So you've got your void on moves, which read the input values, and then it calls to like, actually, no, that's it. It just does that. So here are my dependencies, just the TDS movement. And player input's there, but it's not doing anything, which means I probably have not implemented the old shoot script yet. Now that I think about it, it must just be throwing an event. Let's see, attack, active equipment. Yeah, okay. So it's just throwing an attack there from the active equipment script. So that's something I'm going to work on later today. And the movement controller is not significantly more complicated. I've started to use tooltips too, so that in a couple months, if I come back to this, I can remember what the heck this means. But here are my states. So is aiming, is mouse aiming, is sprinting, is jumping. That's it. These two might be redundant. I just need to investigate it, but I'd love to dial it down a little bit more. And then there's my one dependency, which is the character controller. That's it. Very simple. So very easy for me to debug. Whenever I've had issues, it's been very easy for me to toss a log in there and figure it out, or to display it to a UI on the screen. And then update movement, all it does is just changes the input from the move input value to this.move input. And then when we get to handle move, right away, it's now assigning the move input X and Y to a vector 3, and we're off to the races. So easy. I had a lot of fun building this. I'm very proud of it. It's if at some point, if somebody wants a more technical walkthrough, I can spend some time doing that. But yeah, I just need to work on character camera with it and get the camera zooming in a little bit when you're sprinting. I think that's what I want to do. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. This is a very, very long video log. If you, excuse me, if you are into this kind of thing, tell me what you're working on. If you got this far into the video, which I know it's long, maybe drop me a comment like, I don't know, be not afraid from that weird gyroscope thing that I tossed in there. But with that said, I'm Coach T. This is me documenting my progress in learning, and I hope that it's valuable to somebody. But in another year, I'm looking forward to coming back to this and be like, ha, what a goon. He could barely do anything. So, all right, I got work to do. Have a good weekend.